blessed day. My name is Noland M. Santiago II, BSIT 2J, and I would like to welcome you to virtual presentation about architecture in the Philippines, part of the course subject Reading Visual Arts. In this virtual presentation, you will learn more about the architectures in the Philippines and some of the example of it. Additionally, I will be giving you the opportunity to see the famous architecture in the Philippines, so it helps you to learn and more visualize. I'm hoping you will learn something and enjoy watching. Before we start, allow me to define architecture. Architecture, according to Wikipedia, is a general term to describe building and other physical structure. The art and science of design, building, and non-building structure. The physical, design, and method of construction of buildings and other physical structure. A unifying and coherent from or structure. Knowledge of arts, science, technology, and humanity. And the architecture is also a design activity of architecture from macro level, urban design, landscape architecture, to the micro level, construction detail and furniture, and practice of architect, where architecture means offering or rendering the professional services in connection with the design and construction of building or built environment. The architecture of the Philippines. From Wikipedia, the architecture of the Philippines, or in Filipino, Arkitekturang Pilipino, reflects the historical and cultural tradition in the country. Most prominent historical structure in the archipelago are influenced by Austronesian, Chinese, Spanish, and the American architectures. The architecture of the Philippines contains: number 1, house structure, religious structure, fortifications, rice terraces, limestone tomb complex of Kahamhatik, the American period and modern period, United Architect of the Philippines, and last is the heritage town and cities. Architecture of the Philippines. The sample of house structure, we have the Bahay Kubo, also known as Nipahat. Nipahat or Bahay Kubo is a house where built in more or less similar manner. In the same way that settlements were built beside river and streams. The houses were built near rice field and coconut grove and orchard. The house sit on posts raised above the ground. The rooms were small and generally with a single multipurpose room, having only cooking space. Differentiate among the areas in the domestic work like washing, bathing, and water storage. The houses were made of raw materials like wood and bamboo. Tree houses, or house built on trunk of tree rooted to the ground, were seen as advantageous position. The door of the houses were usually oriented to direction where the sun rises and never faced toward the west or to the west, and an architecture tradition which can be explained by the value and belief system that early inhabitants of the land have. Later on the invention of various tools allowed the fabrication of tent-like shelter and tree houses. Early classical houses were characterized by rectangular structure, elevated steel foundation, and covered with voluminous hatches, roof ornamented with the gravel panels, and structure could be lifted as a wool carried to a new site. Examples include the Ipigao House and the Royal Novelties Torogan. The architecture of the classical period of the Philippines is based on vernacular architecture for most of its centuries, and Islamic architecture in some of the coastal area in south, plus the interior of the Lanao after the 30th century. The Bahay Kubo is the term for the nipa built out of nipa. This type of edifice were characterized of the way that the indigenous people of the Philippines built homes prior to the arrival of the Spanish colonizer. They are still used today, especially in the rural area. Different architecture designs are present among different ethnologistic groups in the country, although most homes built along the shoreline confront and being still houses similar to those found in neighboring countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and other countries of the Southeast Asia. Another example of the architecture of the Philippines house structure is the Bahay na Bato. The Bahay na Bato, arrival of the Spaniards in 1571, brought in the European colonial architecture to the Philippines. Top-notch, specifically suited for the North Tropics. European architecture was transposed in Acapulco, Mexico, into a unique Filipino style. In this era, the nipa hut or the Bahay Kubo gave way to the Bahay na Bato, stone house, and became the typical house of the noble Filipino. The Bahay na Bato, the colonial Filipino house, followed the nipa hut arrangement, such an open ventilation and elevated apartment. The most obvious difference between the houses would be the material that was used to build them. The Bahay na Bato was constructed out of the bricks and stone rather than the traditional bamboo, timber, and other wooden material that elevate the house. It's a mixture of native Filipino, Spanish, and Chinese influence during the 19th century. Wealthy Filipino built some of the pine house, usually with the solid stone foundation or bricks, lower wall, and overchanging wooden upper story in balustrade, and copy shell sliding window and tilted roof. excellent preserved example of the houses of the illustrated Filipino can be admired in Bigan, Ilocos Sur. Preserved example of the bahay na bato are found in Taal, Batangas, Boac, Marinduque, in Southern Luzon, Iloilo, and Carcar, Cebu, in the Visayas, and the Dapitan, Zamboanga del Norte. During World War II, many heritage districts and towns outside Metro Manila were heavily destroyed and damaged by American and Japanese bombs. Reports of deliberate burning of colonial structure by Japanese soldiers were also rampage. The destroyed and damaged heritage structure have never been restored and now lay in ruins and have been replaced with shanty concrete structure with significant architecture aesthetic. Many scholars have championed for Japan and American accountability for the destruction of many Filipino landscape and towns, but not to avail. Architecture in the Philippines. Example of religious structure is the churches. The best example is the Baway Church. Earthquake, Baroque, and Baroque churches of the Philippines. The Order of Augustinians, Augustinian province of Most Holy Name of Jesus of the Philippines, built many churches and over the Philippines. There are magnificent structures can still be found throughout the Philippines. And the Paway Church in Ilocos Norte is one of the most prominent type of this structure. This unique specimen, Filipino architect called Filipino Baroque from the Spaniard era, has been included in the World Heritage Site list of the UNESCO. The church was built by Augustinian friars from 1694 until 1710. It showed the earthquake-proof Baroque-style architecture. The bell tower served as an observation post in 1896 for the Katipuneros during Philippine Revolution against Spaniards and against the Filipino guerrillas during the Japanese occupation in the world. Paalala, isa din po ito sa napuntahan ko ng lugar. The present structure is the third to stand on the site and has survived 7 major earthquakes and the war in Manila. The church remained under the care of Augustinian who found it. The church also houses the legacies of the Spaniard Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, Juan Salcedo Salcedo, and Martin de Gotti, who are buried and laid in the rest of tomb under the church. The church has 14 side chapel and throne in the ceiling up to the court low of the hand card. 17th century, sit on Malabe, a beautiful tropical hardwood adjacent to the church in a small museum run by Augustinian order featuring the unique and antique basement, colonial furniture, and religious painting and icon. It was named a National Historical Landmark by the Filipinos government in 1976, together with the ancient churches in the country. It was designed as the part of the World Heritage Sites Baroque Church of the Philippines in 1993. Another example of the church architecture is the Iglesia ni Cristo churches. During American colonial rule over the Philippines, there was a variety of rural anti-colonial movement obtained with this religious stone. And American Protestant missionaries introduced several alternatives to the Roman Catholic Church. The established church during Spanish colonial period, Iglesia ni Cristo Church, primarily to serve as a place of worship and art used to other religious functions. Anthropologist Fernando Nakpil Sialcita said that INC churches was the unique identified for its exuberant use of fanciful form and ornament. Churches were started to build in his style during the late 1940s and early 50s, with the first concrete chapel built in Sampaloc, Manila in 1948. The pioneer concrete structure of the church are mostly influenced by mixing neo-Gothic and Art Deco, and some are built in the style of Art Deco alone. The INC Central Temple, which opened on July 27, 1984, can be accommodate up to 7,000 persons and cost about $2 million. The Central Temple featured octagonal spire, fine lattice work, and ribs window. Recent build of various of Carlos A. Santos Violas, designed on the Central Temples. These are designed to accommodate 250 to 1,000 persons, while larger churches in Metro Manila and provincial capitals can be accommodate up to 3,000 persons. Prominent architecture such as Juan Nakpil and Carlos Raul Villanueva has been involved in designing INC churches, while engineer and construction department of INC oversees the uniform design in the church building. Another example is the mosques. The mosques in the Philippines. Prior to the usage of common Islamic mosques architecture, which can also be seen in Arabia and modern architecture, the vernacular mosques of the Philippines used to be the hut style and the pagoda style, which were the common until the late 19th century. Most of the mosques in the Philippines today have common Islamic architecture imported from Arabia, merged with the modern style through some vernacular pagoda-style mosque can still seen in Mindanao, such as the Masjid Datu Untong Balabaran of Tabiran in Datu Odin, Situan, Maguindanao. There have been proposals to the UNESCO Heritage Mosque of the Philippines in the Philippine tentative list of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Declaration in the future. The proposal made were to implement the historic mosques of the Philippines, mosques in Sinubul, to import vernacular mosques of the Philippines, Langa Ranga style and pagoda style mosque, or the combined both input them in tentative list of UNESCO.